Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, as Saudi Arabia declares life for women in the country has improved considerably, one activist who promoted gender equality in her social media posts is now in jail. I'll be talking to Bisam Fakir from Amnesty International about her plight. And as Pakistan confronts a series of crippling heat waves, it's pregnant women and newborns who suffer the most. As a result, its midwives have found themselves on the front line of climate change. And the life of Alice Milliat, the little-known French woman who established the first ever Women's Olympics in Paris in 1922. But first, and there's a Nike ad which has gone viral, which is encouraging young Saudi women to take up sports, something that would be unthinkable 10 years ago. To the outsider, life in Saudi Arabia for women seems to have changed dramatically in recent years. They can now drive, female dress codes have been relaxed, while the government has invested hugely in sports and entertainment. However, human rights groups say at the same time it has also convicted and sentenced dozens of people for expressing their views against the authorities online. Amnesty International has called for the immediate and unconditional release of Mahanel Al-Hataibi, a 29-year-old fitness instructor and women's rights activist who was sentenced to 11 years in jail by a Saudi court last January. Joining me now from Amman is Bisam Fakir, a campaigner with Amnesty International. Bisam, thank you for joining us. Firstly, tell me more about Manahel and how the young fitness instructor ended up in prison.
Manahel is a woman human rights defender and she's a fitness influencer. And she's been sentenced to 11 years in prison on terrorist offenses for broadcasting false news, according to them, and publishing information related to terrorist crimes. But Amnesty has reviewed the court documents, and we know that the reason that she was charged is because she posted videos of herself on Snapchat in indecent clothes and went to the shops without wearing a abaya, and called for an end to the male guardianship system on Twitter. So, in one of the recent calls that that her family received from her, they said that she was being prevented from doing yoga or any type of physical activity in prison. And this really broke my heart because the reason that she became a fitness influencer was because she has a condition with her muscles. In one of her last calls, she also said that she suspects she has a broken leg from being beaten. Just the injustice of it all is just heartbreaking.
Yet life per son has improved undoubtedly in Saudi Arabia. So why do women activists continue to face oppression?
Life has improved for Saudi women in numerous ways. So, for example, they were granted the right to drive. They were granted the right to travel without a male guardian. But notably, the women that campaigned for the right to drive were imprisoned. Some of them have since been released, but they're facing travel ban. They faced torture in prison. It is, I believe, a case of pinkwashing, entertainment washing, sports washing. Saudi Arabia is just sinking millions of dollars into cleaning up its image. And as an Amnesty International campaigner, my fear is this, that all of these, attempts to create these smoke and mirrors through things like, this Nike ad or bidding to host the World Cup in 2034, it really gives them cover to continue imprisoning people like Manahel, to continue imprisoning women human rights defenders and people that are expressing themselves online. And we really need to be on guard about this.
Is there any grassroots feminism at all when you take into account the current environment?
Saudi women are incredibly brave. There are things that you and I might not be aware of. There's organizing happening all the time in Saudi Arabia. We're getting court documents that indicate that people are being detained for expressing themselves. Saudis have shown incredible bravery, but the reality is that the Saudi Arabian government has not allowed for any civil society organizations to operate at present. And there's just such a high price to pay for activism. And that's precisely why our voices abroad are just so important right now, so that we can call for freedom for these individuals that have that have been detained and say what the people inside Saudi Arabia aren't able to say for fear of being imprisoned or even sentenced to death for expressing themselves.
There was much anger back in March when Saudi Arabia was appointed to the chair of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, especially given its poor human rights record. Does the international community, as a result, hold any sway?
You know, the international community does hold sway over Saudi Arabia, but sadly, we're not seeing states use that sway to the best of their abilities. So when Saudi Arabia was appointed chair to the Commission on the Status of Women, where, the job of this commission is to empower women and to promote gender equality, we didn't see a single state in the room raise objections. This is absolutely outrageous. Why are they not using their influence to free people that are being held in prison that have no one to advocate for them inside the country? The Saudi Arabia recently went through something called the Universal Periodic Review in the Human Rights Council, where its human rights record is reviewed by other states. I also watched the hearing where the Universal Periodic Review was adopted. I didn't see any states raise objections, even though Saudi Arabia rejected some really important recommendations, one of which was to refrain from reprisals against human rights defenders. And the second one was to release all demonstrators and journalists and human rights defenders that are held solely for exercising their freedom of expression. We can and should expect better from the international community, which does hold sway over Saudi on its human rights record.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To Pakistan now, where heat waves are becoming hotter and more frequent due to extreme weather conditions resulting from climate change. Pregnant women and newborns are among those to be most impacted by the rising heat, and in a nation already facing a shortage of midwives, as this report explains.
Fainting, dehydration, nausea, all dangers faced by pregnant women in Pakistan's extreme heat. On Baba Island, off the coast from Karachi, there is just one midwife who arrives by boat. During punishing heat waves, Neha Mankani sees the impact on mothers and babies.
We see a real increase in low birth weight babies. We see preterm birth. We definitely see an increase in pregnancy losses. There's some summer months where all the babies that are born through our program in these islands are hospitalized for respiratory issues.
In Pakistan, heat waves are becoming hotter, longer, and more frequent due to climate change. In May and June, temperatures hit 52 degrees Celsius for days. There is no hospital on Baba Island. Mankani founded the Mama Baby Fund in 2015 and set up a clinic there. And until her ambulance boat launched last year, expectant mothers were at the mercy of the elements. Last summer, Zainab miscarried during a heat wave.
While cooking, all of a sudden I felt ill. My husband went to find someone to transport me, but he couldn't find anyone. Finally, we went in a small boat. On the way to the hospital, my baby died.
Polluted water, no access to running water, and little electricity on the island increases the health risks. The clinic provides basic advice to expectant mothers during heat waves, such as using dry, clean towels to wrap their newborns in, washing their breasts before feeding, and staying hydrated. Girls on the impoverished island wed as young as 16 years old, so mothers are often inexperienced.
Now, with Paris hosting the Olympics, this is the time more than ever to remember the pioneers of women's sports. French woman Alice Milliat established the first ever Women's Olympics in Paris in 1922, but it took another 100 years for parity to be reached, with the Paris Games being the first this year to see the same number of women athletes as men.
It's 1896 in Athens, and Baron Pierre de Coubertin, then president of the International Olympic Committee, revives the modern Olympic Games. But only male athletes are invited to compete.
Je n'approuve pas personnellement la participation des femmes à des concours publics. Aux Jeux Olympiques, leur rôle devrait être surtout de couronner les vainqueurs. Le véritable héros olympique est à mes yeux l'adulte mâle individuel.
But in the western French city of Nantes, the daughter of a grocer decided to challenge the status quo. Alice Milliat was born in 1884. Her parents always encouraged her to be independent. And, aged 20, she moved to London, where she worked as an au pair, and where she also discovered a passion for sport, specifically rowing. Widowed at only 24 years old, she then devoted her life to challenging patriarchal and misogynistic attitudes in the world of sport.
At that time, male domination was based on the idea that women's bodies were weaker than men's, and women playing the same sports as men would show that women were actually equal to men.
Alice Milliat stirred up controversy in a male-dominated society hostile to the very idea of women in sport.
They thought sports could impact women's fertility, could harm their reproductive organs, and make it difficult to get pregnant, which was their main role at that time.
But Alice Milliat hit back, and in 1922 organised the first World Games for women in Paris. With 77 athletes from 5 different countries, the event was an unqualified success, drawing large crowds. 6 years later, Milliat won her battle when the Amsterdam Olympic Games officially hosted female athletes for the first time. And she became the first woman to serve on an Olympic jury for athletics. But Milliat withdrew from the world of sport at the end of the 1930s after falling ill and growing tired of the endless criticism. She lived out the rest of her life in anonymity until her death in 1957 at the age of 73.
And that's all for this edition, but in the meantime, we'd love to hear from you, so do reach out with your suggestions via Facebook, Instagram or X. So until the next show, bye for now.